Welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. So this is the applicant workshop for the ADR UK call for research fellowships utilising the magistrates and Crown Court data. And that's the first data that's become available through our programme with MoJ's Data First programme. So I'm Karen Powell, I'm Head of Research Strategy and Commissioning at ADR UK in the Strategic Hub. And this call that we want to talk about today is the result of a close collaboration between ADR UK, ONS and MoJ. So we're all here today and really excited to be able to share this with you. So just before we get going, I'll just do a quick bit of housekeeping because there's a few of us on the call. Can I suggest we all keep ourselves muted, but of course unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. I suggest put your questions in the chat box. We have a lot of content to cover and I know you've all got loads of questions and we absolutely want this session to be about answering them. But I know there's also some complexities in the call, so we've decided the most efficient approach might be just us sharing everything that we want to explain and then allowing plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So keep posting your questions as they come up in the chat box and we'll deal with them all together at the end. We're also going to put a link to the slides in the chat box, so they'll be coming shortly and all the slides are numbered, so if you have any issues you ought to be able to look at those offline. And just to say as well, the meeting's being recorded. Okay. So the objective of today's session really is just to walk you through the detail of the call, the origins of the call, the aims and the process for applying, and to talk about the magistrates and Crown Court data in a bit more detail, and really to answer as many questions as we can to help you decide whether you want to apply, what's required, and how to navigate the various processes involved. Okay, so our agenda then for the session is just to give a bit of background around what ADR UK is and what our ambition is for the Research Fellowship scheme. We're going to give a bit more background specifically about the MoJ Data First programme, and MoJ are going to talk in more detail both about the magistrates and Crown Court data and also their particular research interests. I'm going to come back and talk about some of the key outputs and expectations of the fellowship. We're going to give an overview of the process and how to apply. We know there's three aspects in terms of getting funding decision, getting data owner approval and gaining legal access to the data. So we want to take you through that really carefully. And then we'll kind of recap on the overall timetable and then open up really for you to ask all and any questions that you would like to. So hopefully our bit should be kind of 45 minutes or so, no more than an hour. So we should have a good hour for you to be able to answer all of your questions. Okay. All right then, so before we get started, I'd just like to introduce the team. So this is very much a kind of partnership endeavour and we've all been working up to this for some time. So we're really pleased to come here and share this with you. So like I say, I'm Karen Powell, Head of Research Strategy and Commissioning at ADR UK Strategic Hub. I've got the lead for our dedicated research budget, which is funding, amongst other things, this research fellowship scheme. So can I ask the team to unmute yourselves in turn and introduce yourselves? So let's go in order then, starting with Katrina.
Hi, I'm Katrina Taylor. Just turning my camera on quickly. I'm a project manager within ADR UK and I'm involved with the Data First programme. Just to let you know, I am trying desperately to send you a link to this slide deck, but it keeps bouncing back as unsendable. So I will work on that in the background.
Okay, and I'm Bogusia Wojciechowska. I am part of the ADR UK team working specifically on this call. I'm the Research and Impact Manager working with Karen.
Hi, I'm Tom Jackson. I work at Ministry of Justice and specifically I'm working on the Data First project on the criminal court data, which we'll be hearing about today.
Hello, I'm Andromaki Celoni. I'm academic lead of the MoJ ADR UK Data First project and also Professor of Quantitative Criminology at Nottingham Trent University. And I'm here to actually link academics to the Data First project.
Hiya. Just checking you can hear me actually. So I'm Rose Elliott. I'm head of ADR curation at the Office for National Statistics with responsibilities for growing the range of admin data available for external research.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Nash. I'm part of the data curation team at ONS with Rose, and we work to bring in more admin data into the SRS.
And hi, I'm Lily O'Flynn from the UK Statistics Authority, and I work very closely providing secretariat services to the Research Accreditation Panel, and I'll be covering the legal aspect of the approvals for these projects.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks everyone, and thank you for showing your faces. I think that's great. So we're all going to take our turn to present various aspects, and then we'll all be here to answer any of your questions. Okay, so let's get going then. So what is ADR UK? So ADR UK is a partnership of academic and government organisations across the 4 UK nations. It's our mission to transform the way researchers access the wealth of public sector data and therefore really enable better informed policy decisions that can improve lives. So across the UK as a whole, admin data is currently a largely untapped but really informative and rich resource. And the wealth of this data, most of which wasn't really created for research, just a byproduct of individuals interacting with public services, has enormous potential to create important knowledge and provide powerful insights into society and really point to areas where change is needed. So we want to do this by joining up just the abundance of admin data that's already been created by government and other public bodies all across the UK, and facilitate safe access and secure data access for approved researchers. So what we're really trying to create sustainable research resources from these newly linked, newly joined up data, so the wider academic community can work together to provide valuable insights into how our society and our economy can function. And the greatest benefits really from admin data come when we create linked data by joining one government department or public body data to that of another. And linking data from across the public sector, really that's the essence of our work across ADR UK. And it really enables researchers to study how different aspects of life then interact with one another and to enhance our understanding of UK society. So to support this cross-government approach, we're really working closely in close collaboration with government and all the hats they wear, whether that's as a data owner or decision maker, policy makers, whether as researchers themselves or research users. So we're really tailoring our approach to ensure that researchers and government can work together to understand the most pressing social issues and the most important policy questions and to really drive change and improve lives across the UK. Okay, so the Strategic Hub is a core ADR UK partner along with ONS. So the Strategic Hub, like I said, is responsible for coordinating work across the partnership, but also we manage this dedicated research budget that's delivering kind of UK-wide data and research, and ONS, also a core ADR UK partner, is providing the infrastructure and the secure access to this data for research. And together here today with MoJ as well. So for this particular research fellowship call, MoJ are our data owner and key partner, and through one of our first funded programs, so the Strategic Hub Fund has funded MoJ's Data First program to connect the wealth of data across the justice system. So the Strategic Hub manages this dedicated fund for commissioning projects using administrative data, and that's in line with our mission and to better inform policy and practice and improve lives. And for the first year, so to say also that ADR UK, is initially funded over 3 years, 44 million. We've currently got further funding under consideration, but for the first year of our investment, from May 2019 to May 2020, with our Strategic Hub Fund, we really spent a lot of time supporting what were invitation-only bids to build new research data sets and carry out innovative research, working really closely with government and their particular interests. And as a result of that process and that first year's worth of funding, we've now got a flow of new de-identified research-ready data, all to be deposited with the ONS Secure Research Service and to be made available for wider academic access. So hence this call. So the Strategic Hub works with government in the way this diagram tries to show, to fund new data linkages. ONS then make them available through the ONS Secure Research Service, and we make them available to researchers with a view to drawing out policy relevant research that can inform and change and have public benefit. So now we've invested in that flow of newly linked de-identified data, we want to make them available to the wider academic community as soon as possible. So these research fellowships really are still a pilot investment in some regards, making the case, a pilot investment in the sense we continue to try and make the case for ongoing investment in terms of admin data linkage for research. So really with these fellowships, we're really looking to showcase the data's potential for policy impact and public benefit. And as well as that, we also really want to learn from these some of the first uses, you'd be some of the first users of this data, really trying to understand and kind of get under the skin of the data, capture insights about the data so we can continue to build and get that feedback loop. So these really are kind of sustainable research resources for the benefit of others in the future. So this is going to be a series of research fellowship calls that we're going to be launching over the next year, each one promoting a different data set. And all research fellowships are going to be developed in close collaboration with ONS and the particular data owner. And there are complexities in gaining secure access to this data, especially when there might be multiple data owners. So it is our ambition to streamline those processes, and we recognise that is very much work in progress. And we've been working to launch this first call for some time, and we're learning all the time. So we recognise that we won't necessarily have all the answers, and it's not necessarily a perfect process yet, but we're very much working towards making these data available, which just have enormous potential for wider academic access. So we are very open as well to reflection and learning as we go. Any feedback we have, as you go through the process would be great, and happy to kind of roll that in, and we learn as well. We'll be learning as we go. Yeah, and again, the collaboration is important in terms of ensuring that research is policy relevant, that's essential to us. So some data linkages have been accessible for a while to a select few academic institutions, but like I say, we really do want to make these data available to all researchers and really level the playing field. And that includes for us early career researchers as well. So yeah, we're super excited to launch this research fellowship scheme, and today particularly in collaboration with MoJ, promoting the first 2 data sets to be created through the Data First programme. That's the magistrates and the Crown Court data. So just very quickly then, in terms of the research fellowship scheme overall, and before we go into the detail of this particular scheme, which is focused on magistrates and Crown Court data, there are core objectives which are going to be true for all of our research fellowship schemes, which are about kind of creating useful research, useful data, and really useful engagement. So what we're looking for in terms of useful research is kind of pathfinder projects that are really going to showcase the potential of data for policy impact. We're looking for focused and well-defined research questions, but also recognise that you won't have had access to the data yet, and there's still engagement to be done. And so we recognise that some adaptation might be required along the way. We're also going to be asking for evidence that there is demand for the research as well. In terms of useful data, this is about making sure that the data continues to be developed as an ongoing research for resources, an ongoing resource for researchers in the future. We want to be able to kind of build that feedback loop from what you're learning about the data, so we can improve the user guide and the metadata files as we go. We're keen to encourage that code is shared openly amongst research fellows and ultimately publishing it. And we're keen for you to make recommendations about plausible extensions to the data for the future as well. There's some other aspects in the call which are optional in relation to the data. So if you're interested in developing new research concepts in the data, for example, or if you want to link to other data, that's also possible, but not required. The data does need to be publicly available and linked in this case only on geography. We can come back to that later. And also, we are open to the idea of kind of growing a community of super users. So again, this is optional, and we can gauge it depending on the interest of the research fellows, but it could be we can kind of offer additional funds and support for those that want to come together and be a group or community of super users and define their own common goals. In terms of useful engagement, yeah, absolutely looking to foster opportunities between academia and government and really making the space to allow for new thinking and kind of really kind of nurture those relationships, and also absolutely essential to maintain public acceptance, public acceptability of the use of this type of data is essential. So we'll be offering support in terms of stakeholder engagement. We have a strong network and we're keen to make sure that you can benefit from that. So we'll be running at least one event where we would expect the research fellows to kind of run the content, so to speak, but we would host it and organise it and bring the right people to the table, and public engagement as well. I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so yeah, moving on then to the work of MoJ. Like I said, we've introduced Data First briefly, and Tom's going to talk more about it but really the essence is about linking data together across the justice system to create this sustainable body of knowledge, so we can really kind of understand more the interactions of the users of the system to drive positive change. Okay, I'll pass to you, Tom.
Lovely, thanks, Karen. So yeah, a little bit more on Data First from MoJ's point of view. We're using Data First as a 3-year project to link our datasets, our criminal, civil and family datasets together to hopefully bring a joined up system of users within the justice system. So just there you can see our timeline, so hopefully we can achieve that by 2022. Right now, we're in September 2020, and we're at the beginning of this project. And you can see just there that in June and August 2020, our first milestones were completing a Research Really Magistrates Court Defendant Case Level Dataset and a Research Really Crown Court Defendant Case Level Dataset as well. Both of those are now on the ONS Secure Research Server, and they are ready to be used for research. So you're all probably here to hopefully find out a little bit more about these 2 datasets in particular, as these will be the focus of this research fellowship. So we can go to the next slide, please, Karen. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the criminal court data so far. Hopefully you've seen from the call spec that we gave a couple of lines on what's in this dataset, or in these datasets. And we also provided a link to the data catalogs for each corresponding dataset and also the user guide. So very briefly, I'll give a high-level kind of overview of what the datasets are about. So our magistrates court data is a very large dataset. It contains 12.4 million records. And the coverage of this is from January 2011 to December 2019. The structure of this is that it has 1 record per defendant per case, and there are variables within it which give you details on characteristics. So, for example, on a defendant's age, their sex, their ethnicity, and it also gives things on offence proceedings and outcomes in the criminal cases dealt with by the Magistrates Court in England and Wales. I will also just say that in the Magistrates Court data, this does cover youth courts as well. So you will find that there are records for defendants under the age of 18. The Crown Court data.
Tom, just briefly, sorry to interrupt you. We've just had a comment that your sound is a bit muffled. I don't know whether there's anything you can do there on your mic, possibly not. It could be a problem at either end, but I just wanted to raise that. Sorry to break your flow.
Oh, that's okay. If the sound is muffled for a lot of you, please let me know, and if so, I can try and do something about it. But if it's just one, hopefully it might be on another end. Sound okay. I will continue.
Okay, great.
And hopefully on the recording, you can come back to this, and it won't be muffled on the recording after this. Anyway, great, thank you. So the Crown Court data, it's a little bit smaller, but it does share the same structure as the Magistrates Court data set as well. So there again, there's 1 record per defendant per case, and again you have the same variables there, such as things on characteristics such as their age, ethnicity as well, and it gives you things about offence proceedings and outcomes. I will say though, if you're interested in using the Crown Court data for appeals data, it's a little bit less populated, so it's perhaps best used for sentencing and trial data within the Crown Courts. Again, the coverage is a little bit different than the Magistrates Court, so we have coverage from January 2013 to December 2019. So these are 2 single-sourced different data sets, but there is one thing about them which is actually quite similar, and that's they're both deduplicated. So this is something that's actually quite unique. I've just lost the slides on my thing. I'm not sure if anyone else has just lost those.
Yeah, they've gone for me too.
Thanks. I'm not sure who is sharing slides, but you actually reshare, please. If not, I'm happy to. I've got them up on mine, so I'll just quickly share anyway from my screen. Lovely. Are the slides now visible for people?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. So the Crown Court data and the Magistrates Court are both deduplicated data. And by that, we mean that we can now, for the first time, see if a defendant has entered the court at one point, if that same defendant has entered it at another point in time. So within both of these data sets, there's a variable called the estimated defendant ID. And that gives an estimate for where, say, person A in the Magistrates Court entered the court in, say, January 2011, we can then provide an estimate to say whether that person A has then re-entered the court at another point in time. So that's a really unique feature of both of these individual single source data set, and will hopefully add a lot of value to our evidence base. So there's a little bit of an overview about the two data sets, and I realise it's quite a limit of what I can say about the data set without you actually getting your hands on it. So what we've done is try and provide as many resources as we can to help you understand what's in the data and how you might be able to use it for your potential research projects. So we've got three main resources here, and hopefully the first two I'm going to talk about are quite familiar, as we have linked these within the call specs. So first, you've got the user guide. So what this does is it provides you a general overview of Data First. It kind of tells you about the scope of the data shares currently listed under the project. So there's a chapter on the Crown Court data, and there's a chapter on the Magistrates Court data. We give you a little bit about how it can be used, any limitations. We've got a comment on the data protection, and also how you can apply separately from this funding call. There's a link there as well to the Data First user guide if you haven't been able to see it already. The second resource, and if you're really interested in applying for this criminal court data through this research fellowship, I'd really recommend you look at this data, the data catalogues, and you go into detail. So we've got the Magistrates Court data catalogue, and we've got the Crown Court data catalogue, and within both of those, there's a section on the bottom called the dataset details, and within that, we tell you about the structure, the coverage, and the quality of the overall data set. We also give you an idea about the processing. So, for example, how has the data that's been entered at a magistrates court ended up on the ONS secure research server, and kind of what processes have happened to that data going from one point to the other. There's also a second tab for both of the data catalogues. So the second tab tells you a little bit more about the metadata on all the variables within the data set. So we tell you the variable names, what type they are, a description of them, any comments on it, and also the quality of that variable too. The third resource, which you wouldn't have heard of just yet, because we're just launching this today, is a synthetic data set. So what we've done is we've created a fake data set, one for the Magistrates Court and another for the Crown Court. And this contains 1,000 fake records for both data sets. And so what this aims to do is it mirrors the structure of the raw data sets, which are hosted on the ONS secure research server. And it can be used for researchers to get an idea of the data. So essentially, you'll have all the exact same variable names, just the data itself is fake, but it is structurally coherent. So by that we mean, for example, if someone has been recorded in one offence variable as like a theft from a shop, a higher level version of that variable, for example, it wouldn't be murder, it would be classed as theft. So it's structurally coherent and it mirrors the exact same structure as the real data sets. But it's something for you to get your hands on, something tangible, so you can actually have a look at the data, see what it's all about, and run a code, for example, and get some outputs from it. But obviously this data is fake, and any outputs that you get will be meaningless. So if you do want to get your hands on this and to get an idea of what the data is about, we're not going to put this on gov.uk, but instead we ask you to email datafirst@justice.gov.uk, and we can send you a CSV file with that in. But I would just like to reiterate, this is fake data. It's not the real stuff. It is just structurally the same. So there's a little bit about the resources, so you can hopefully understand a little bit more about the two data sets which are included in this research fellowship, and that can hopefully drive your application for when you apply as well. From MoJ's point of view as well, we're aiming to release a package of work later this year, providing a descriptive analysis of the data sets. This is going to hopefully include a visual paper, which will show just a high level, really descriptive analysis of the flows from a typical user journey through the criminal court system. The second paper we'd like to do will be to provide the key messages that we found from the Magistrates and the Crown Court datasets, and this will be about the users and their interactions with the courts. And then also within this paper, obviously as we use the data more and more, we uncover things about the data quality and any known issues that we've discovered. So we'd quite like to document these, and hopefully what this will do is provide a nice like baseline ahead of when kind of the proposed research fellows will start their research. So that will be coming out way before the research fellowships start, and yeah, we'll provide hopefully a baseline for that research. And so from MoJ, we do have some research interests in this data, and as I said before, the deduplicated feature of this is unique, and for the first time we can actually investigate the extent of repeat users within the criminal courts. So we've got a couple of questions that we're quite interested in. So for example, who are the repeat users of the magistrates and or Crown courts? We'd also like to ask, what is the nature and extent of repeat users of these courts? So do people just return twice, or are repeat users coming back 5, 6, maybe more times? Because this is deduplicated and we now have an estimate of who are the same people returning, this isn't something that we can now actually answer. And that third question, how does sentencing change with repeat use of the criminal courts? Is quite a good question and something that we'd be keen to find more out about. So for example, if somebody has entered the magistrate's court for shoplifting 8 times, and previously we might not have known that was the same person, but now with the deduplicated data, we know that we can provide an estimate saying that it is the same person. And we can actually investigate how their sentencing has changed each time they've entered. Has it escalated? Have there been any changes to it? So those are just some areas of interest we're particularly keen on from the Ministry of Justice. But we will say that when you're applying for this research fellowship, research topics don't just have to be limited to this idea of repeat users or those questions there. You can come up with your own proposed research questions, but it should be noted that they should be of policy relevance, and they should also be evidenced at least by reference to published documents, including MoJ's areas of research interest, which is linked there if you've not seen it before. So that's it from our side. If you do have any questions about the data sets, we'd like to find out a little bit more about it, then please contact datafirst@justice.gov.uk. Again, I would really plug this fake synthetic data because I think it's a really valuable resource. And if there's time, I'm happy to share it at the end of this. But please do get in contact with Data First if you'd like to receive that CSV file. Again, as Karen mentioned at the beginning, about levelling the playing field and making this accessible to early career researchers. Hopefully this resource kind of bridges that gap, and if you may not have exposure, for example, working with such large data sets, and hopefully this kind of fake synthetic data can hopefully give you some exposure to that type of thing. And then also we're going to be talking about the our application form for secure access data a bit later on in this presentation. But if you have any queries on that, then do please get in touch.
Brilliant, thanks Tom. So you're in charge of slides now, if that's okay. Okay, brilliant. So I'm just coming back to some of the key outputs and expectations of the Research Fellowship Award. So we're looking for at least 2 accessible, user-friendly outputs that we envisage putting on the ADR UK website and also on the MoJ Data First page on gov.uk. So we're really looking for these to kind of maximise research impact by giving busy policy leads short and easy to digest summaries. So one of those we'd like to be a data insight. So this is a kind of format that we've already used, and we can share templates. The data insight examples are available on our ADR UK website for you to see. And then another one of your choice. So those are just some examples. They could be, some findings or data visualizations, policy briefings, for example. Plus, we'd love a blog from you. And then also at least 2 data explained. So this is another product that's still under some development, I would say, but we will provide a template again to create some consistency. And this is about really summarising and recording your learnings about the data, again for the benefit of others. So we'd be looking for one kind of perhaps half a page to 2-page short summary within the funding period, and then another more detailed document to be deposited within the ONS SRS within a year of the funding period. So the shorter version to be publicly available, the longer version to be available just to those researchers, accredited researchers that have had relevant projects approved. And the information you create really will be a useful source of information for MoJ to keep their official user guide and associated metadata up to date. Academic publications absolutely supported, and we're keen for you to make space for those. We am keen to stress that we very much have a commitment to a dual publication strategy, so we do get that balance between easily digestible outputs for government and policymakers and wider society, actually, with papers submitted to journals. In terms of public and stakeholder engagement, We do expect public engagement, and the method or for any of these will depend on your research question and your own preference and expertise, and kind of do, especially for early career researchers, do kind of build in expertise or use existing mechanisms within your institution to support on these sorts of aspects of the grant. As a minimum, in terms of public engagement, we would be asking you to consult our Data First user representation panel, which I'll talk more about later, and also participate in our ADR UK stakeholder events. So we have some kind of minimum requirements there, but support for you to ensure that there's a more straightforward way for you to be able to deliver against those expectations, but there's many other ways that you might choose to do that over and above. And just to say, we have within the Strategic Hub, we have a communications and engagement team, and they'll very much be on hand to support fellows with kind of all aspects of this. Yeah, and it's worth noting that all of these research outputs will have to go through a statistical disclosure control before they're published. Thanks, Tom. Okay, all right, so just quickly then, a bit more about the user representation panel. Yeah, so it's our expectation that all fellows would consult with our user representation panel about the research questions and design, and for this to happen quite early on at the start of the investment period, with the view that, you know, we're really trying to kind of ensure that research makes best sense in a real world context. And so this panel is jointly being organised by MoJ, Data First team, and the ADR UK Hub. And the panel's currently being recruited, so we can definitely keep you updated when that panel's finalised, but we'll include representatives from across the criminal, civil and family justice systems, really kind of representing the users and organisations that can make use of the insights from this data. ADR UK will kind of, will jointly with MoJ, will plan these meetings, and like I say, there'll be one at the beginning of the 6-month fellowship. Yep, okay, I think that's all I wanted to say on that, Tom. Great, all right, Katrina, your slide.
Okay, so some of the feedback that we had early on from an applicant suggested that this was a very, very complex process and confusing. And yes, as Karen mentioned at the beginning, we absolutely recognise that there is a lot going on here. There are 3 different organisations trying to align processes. There are different legal requirements for documentation, all kinds of things going on. Most of it in the background. So what I've tried to do in this diagram is just from an applicant's point of view, show what you would be requested to do and where your kind of touch points with the different organisations would be. I've broken the process down into 5 areas. So these colour coded bits at the top, you will see these in the following slides, where we try to kind of align some of the forms with some of these areas of process. So it should make some kind of sense as we go through it. So as you're all here, you're aware of the call launch. You're aware that the webinar is today. From now until the 20th of October, which is our submission date, that is your chance to put together your applications. So that is the application on the JES form, that is the application on the RAP form, and also the SAD form. So I'll touch on all of these in a moment. But just bear in mind that although there are 3 organisations here, the 3 organisations are here at your disposal to help you. Any questions, any queries, there is plenty of time for back and forth. The contact details for each of us will be at the end of the slide pack. The 3 forms are required for different reasons, which I'll go into in a minute. But basically, the JES form is for the funding decision. The RAP form is for the ONS, UK Stats Authority, legal access to the dataset doesn't meet their criteria. And the SAD form is the MoJ form for the data controller, who in this case is HCTMS, to fulfill their legal responsibilities in approving each project. So what we're asking now, between now and the 20th of October, is that you make a start on these draft applications. On the 20th of October at the latest, you would be asked to say that you would submit your JES form on the JES system and the RAP form on the RAS system. We've got ONS colleagues here who can take you through that in more detail later. One thing we will note is that the SAD form does replicate a lot of the content required from the RAP form. So we will say, please, where possible, we know this is complex and we know there are 3 forms to fill in, but where you can please reuse the content, please repopulate fields and forms with, you know, stuff that you've already used. So after the 20th of October, where you've submitted the RAP form and the JES form, there are things going on in the background where these are being evaluated by the different organisations. ONS, now I'm saying ONS, ONS is a very large organisation, and just for simplicity, there are different teams involved in this. I'm just referring to ONS, so they will correct me later at the different names of the different teams involved. But basically, ONS will do some feasibility screening checks on the RAP form to ensure that the application to access the data set is as accurate and as full as possible to give the best chance of getting through the RAP panel at the end of this process. So there will be backwards and forwards between the applicant and ONS, possibly at this point, just to make sure that the form is filled in correctly. When the applicant then gets a notification from ONS that they are happy with that form, then that content can be completely reused in the SAD form. The SAD form can then be submitted to MoJ by the 10th of November at the latest. The SAD forms will then be used within MoJ's data governance to approve the data access requests on behalf of them as data controller. One thing that I should also mention is that at this point during the application process, researchers should also check their accredited research status. And we ask that by the time of the RAP panel meeting, which is not until the 9th of March next year, that all applicants have undertaken this valid accredited researcher training. So that's just it doesn't have to be done by the 20th of October, it needs to be done by the 9th of March. So in the background then, the JES form is being evaluated by the JES funding panel. Successful applicants from that will be informed of the funding outcome. There is feedback from both the RAP side of things and the SAD MoJ side of things that will feed into the funding panel decision so in terms of approvals and feedback on the project applications from the data owner point of view. Successful applicants from the JES panel will be informed that their applications are then going forward to the final RAP panel, which is on the 9th of March. If successful at that point, then the applicants will be working with ONS to set up a project space and the project can start. I do just want to touch on the fact that if applicants are not successful at the JES funding stage, it just means that, we've only got a certain amount of money that we can spend, that we can support and sponsor projects with. That does not mean that your project is not worthwhile. There is still a chance, this is not the end of your journey. If you still want to proceed with the project, although you haven't received funding from ADR UK, there is, on behalf of both organisations, they would welcome a continuation of dialogue to just to see how much further you can progress project application. We will be making more of information available on that later. It's just, I know there's an awful lot to take in here. So basically, just to recap, there are 3 forms to fill in. 2 of them were submitted in October, another one after that, and then you will have the outcomes of these meetings sent to you. So I can't see anything in the chat because I can't access the chat today, unfortunately. So any questions on this, I'm happy to take later, or if you want to, if there's anything that I need to cover now, Karen.
No, that's great. I was just going to add the Research Accreditation training is only essential in the end for those that are successful. Although if you continue to pursue your data requests and move your project forward and find funding from elsewhere, then of course, yes, you would need to ensure you were an accredited researcher as well. Okay, yeah, you have another slide,
okay,
Katrina, and we'll pick the other questions up as towards the end.
Okay, great. So this is just, again, now, if you can see up in the top right hand corner, there's a little coloured tab. For the next few slides, I've tried to kind of associate the different forms with the different parts of the process, so it's easier to kind of navigate the way through this very complex process. So basically, this just explains why we have so many forms. So as we've touched on earlier, this is a pilot project. This is the first time we've been able to do this. It may be in the future that we're able to streamline further, but at this particular point in time, 3 different forms are required because there are 3 different decision-making panels, and they're each evaluating the project according to their different criteria. So we've got the JES form, which is for the funders, that's ADR UK, so basically UKRI and the BAYS. We need to make a robust decision on sponsoring this research because this is public money. And there are 5 criteria considered, which we'll touch on later. The second form is the SAD form. This is the Secure Access to Data form, and that's to assure the HMCTS as the data controller that there is a legal basis to share this data and the request complies with all data protection legislation. The third one is the RAP form. So again, I'm just calling it ONS, but I know there are different teams within ONS who need this, but this is to assure the UK Stats Authority that the requested access to the data is under the Digital Economy Act. It's independent, consistent, transparent, and they've got a number of criteria that they must fulfill as well. So there's ONS feasibility screening that happens at the beginning. There's the Research Accreditation Panel, which happens at the end, and then, as we've just touched on, the applicants will need to be accredited researchers by the time of the RAP meeting. And I can't stress this enough. If you can reuse content between the forms, please do, because it'll just make it easier for you. We acknowledge that this is complex and there's a lot to fill in.
Great. Okay, next slide then. Thanks, Katrina.
Nope.
Oh, Tom, are you still there? Could you move the slides on, please?
Yeah, is it just the funding application slide that you want?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, perfect. Great. Okay, so some of you, I'm sure, are already familiar with the JES system, but just to quickly set this out. So it's a standard JES application, and a lot of the fields will be standard in terms of objectives and summary and costings. You'll need the case for support, which is 6 sides, and definitely use this as space to respond to the 5 assessment criteria. So I think that could be the next slide. And it'll be those 5 assessment criteria that the panel will be kind of judging your applications against. So do write against those criteria. It'll be helpful for the panel. Justification of resources, 2 sides CV, 2 sides head of department statement. And it's important to note here that we're going to be asking your head of department to make a commitment on behalf of your institution, and they might need to speak to someone else to get that, that if you haven't already as an institution or department registered for secure remote access, which is the assured organisational connectivity, and we'll talk about this later, it's important to state your commitment and willingness to sign up to that in case it becomes the only necessary option. Obviously, you know, we're all very aware with the impact of COVID-19 and any kind of future government guidelines on what's possible if it's not possible to get to physical secure locations, and remote secure locations becomes the only access. AOC, assured organisational connectivity, will be necessary, and we want to ensure that you have the necessary approvals or willingness at least to be able to go forward with that if it becomes necessary. Okay, and your work plan, that's 2 sides. And then there's a couple of other attachments if you're an early career researcher, and there's details in the call about what we mean by early career researchers, but basically, you know, those that haven't progressed yet to an independent researcher, which we see as kind of someone taking a lead as a principal investigator on a grant, but that you include your statement of eligibility and skill development programme. So, you know, to talk about, you know, why you think you want to be considered as an early career researcher, what your training plan is to support you throughout, and how the grant will have an impact on your trajectory to becoming an independent researcher. And early career researchers all need a mentor as well from your home institution, so to have a statement from them and their CV. Letters of support from project partners if applicable, so we encourage project partners. These are partners that are contributing perhaps in kind or financially in some way. You know, they might be on a board, they might have you know, have agreed to help shape your research, for example. Do not provide letters of support from data owners, though, just to stress. So the data owner approval is absolutely essential. But like Katrina's just described, that's something that we're managing behind the scenes. So HMCTS being the data owner, that will all be managed kind of through your form. So please don't contact them separately. Yeah, and then if you've got an existing UKRI award, you can upload your any interim reports, publications where they're cited in your proposal, and any additional letters of support from organisations that have been involved in your research proposal. So yeah, this is a opportunity for individual research fellows, but you can kind of cost in for additional research assistance, but it's not a team opportunity. So it's currently a 6-month research grant up to 65,000. Future research fellowship calls may well be up to 12 months, 6 to 12 months. This one is currently limited to 6, partly on the basis that what I mentioned earlier is that ADR UK is absolutely about linking data. We know we've got linked data coming through in due course. This opportunity is making available as soon as we can the data coming out of the Data First programme, which is initially the magistrates and Crown Court single source data. And I guess for us, it's partly about kind of balancing priorities. We have a fixed fund and we know there are other opportunities coming up. So across a range of linked data. So that sort of describes a little bit about why this particular opportunity is 6 months. Other opportunities may well extend up to 12 months. Yeah, and there's plenty of guidance around JES available, so do make the most of that. We're on hand. There's contact details if you want any more personal support. Okay, thanks, Tom. Yeah, and these are the funding criteria, just briefly to highlight them. They're there in the call documentation, so do write against these. And these will be the features that we will kind of prepare and brief the funding panel to assess the applications against. And there's more detail on those in the call documentation. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so another form. So this is the SAD form, also the secure access to data form. This is another one that you have to fill in, and this is the one that you can get project approval from data owners. So in this case, data owners are HMCTS, and they're an executive body of the MoJ. And so to do that, you have to fill in this form. We've provided a link just there in blue, so you can access this form on gov.uk, so you can have a little look at it. We ask applicants to fill in 6 sections of this, and those 6 sections include things like applicant details, things about your project and the data you wish to request. I'd also stress enough that use the guidance. Also on that link, there is a separate document detailing how you can fill in every single box within this form. We recently revamped this form earlier this year to hopefully make it as user-friendly and as easy to use as possible. And that guidance should hopefully be really solid and a valuable resource for you to use when you're submitting this form. And again, I know this isn't stressed enough, this is obviously a complex process. There are 3 different forms for you to fill in. This is the form you submit in November, and there will be overlap with the form you fill in, the ONS wrap form you fill in. And so we ask that you do reuse content from that form and you put it into this form as well to hopefully save you time, and also to ensure there's consistency between the forms, so we all know that what you're saying in one form is consistent with the other. So I won't get into too much detail here, but I will stress enough that just to get familiar with the form and look at it ahead, have a little browse of it, and also use the guidance online. And so yeah, and also just for your interest as well, your application, when you submit it, it will be considered by the HMCTS Data Access Panel, which is also known as DAP, in case you ever see that anywhere. And also, sorry, one more thing as well. If you do have any questions on this form, do please get in contact with datafirst@justice.gov.uk and use this as a resource as well. We appreciate that these forms can be long. You will have questions about it, so please do use this as a resource from now until October and until November as well.
Okay, so over to ONS. We'll just talk you through how to actually apply to use the data. So we've got responsibilities under the Digital Economy Act to make sure that we are all meeting a number of criteria, most important of which for you is that you are an accredited researcher. So to become one of those, you need to either have an undergraduate degree or higher, including a significant portion of maths or statistics, or we just need to be able to demonstrate at least 3 years quantitative research experience. So that's as a minimum. And then we have training, which is available online. You need to agree to be included on the public record. So there is a published list of all accredited researchers on the ONS website. And then you'll be expected to sign a declaration to demonstrate that you understand what your obligations are in terms of keeping the data secure whilst it's in your care, and obviously not onward sharing anything you shouldn't be. If you go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we've got a new online portal which will lead you through this. It's our Research Accreditation service. Again, it's all online. So you need to create an account, and then it will guide you through putting in your experience information, and then you will also book your user training through this. And it's also where you will fill in your research accreditation project form. Feedback is given at every stage, and you can check in on the website to see sort of what's next, what do I need to do, and make sure everything's covered. So I'll just hand over to my colleague Lily from the UK Stats Authority to talk you through the Research Accreditation Panel project form.
Thanks, Rose. That's great. So yeah, as Rose says, I'm representing the UK Statistics Authority, and essentially our part of the process is making that disclosure of secure data to yourselves as the researchers legal. So this data is being made available through the legal gateway provided by the Digital Economy Act and its research powers. And it essentially means that where a data owning public authority, such as the Ministry of Justice, agrees to it, researchers doing projects in the public good can be allowed access to this secure data in a de-identified form. So along with the Digital Economy Act legislation, there's also a research code of practice and accreditation criteria. And essentially this sets the criteria and conditions for researchers, process and environments and research projects and what they must do to receive accreditation before a project can go ahead. So in terms of the process and environment itself, that must receive accreditation to show that it's a secure environment. And in the case of the Office for National Statistics Secure Research Service that researchers on this call will be using, that accreditation has already been granted. As Rose mentioned, researchers themselves will require accreditation, and that's all handled through the ONS Secure Research Service. And then it is the Research Accreditation Panel that look at the research projects themselves. So these projects need to be accredited to ensure that they meet these conditions set out in the Code of Practice, which is that the project is feasible, it provides a clear public benefit, it demonstrates analytical merit, and there is evidence of formal ethical consideration for the project. So the Stats Authority is the statutory accrediting body for all of these processes, so we have oversight of these. However, it is the Research Accreditation Panel that we've appointed to make these decisions on our behalf to ensure that the decisions are independent, consistent and transparent. If we could go to the next slide, please, Tom. Thank you. So when you're preparing your Research Accreditation Panel application, the UK Statistics Authority has published some guidance and an example DEA project application, which really highlights key requirements that the Research Accreditation Panel is looking for when they're assessing your project applications. This is really to guide you and enable you as researchers to demonstrate evidence of each of these required criteria to the level of detail that's required. So you can use the link there in the slides to have a look at that guidance, but it really focuses on those areas of the application that the RAP tend to discuss in most detail. So that's normally around the methodology, the data that you're requesting and why, and what is the public good in the request for that data. So this example guidance uses real projects that have already been accredited by the Research Accreditation Panel, and it points at areas of good practice as well as providing additional guidance of what the panel is looking for and why. So we really do strongly recommend that researchers use this guidance when they're initially drafting their research project applications, as it's really there to help you ensure that the level of detail that the panel require to assess your project application is there. Another condition of a project accreditation is that researchers can demonstrate that the ethics of the proposed research have been considered, that any ethical risks have been identified, and that researchers have begun to think about possible mitigations to minimise those ethical risks. Again, to support you researchers in thinking through the ethics of your proposals, we've developed an ethics self-assessment tool. So any researcher is invited to use this, but the tool is particularly targeted at those researchers that don't have an alternative form of ethical scrutiny. So if you don't have a university or institutional ethics panel that you can use to discuss the ethics of your project with, we really encourage you to use this tool as your form of approval. So again, guidance on using this tool is available on the Stats Authority website, and you can use the link provided to have a look at that. But we also do provide expert user support at the Stats Authority to both the researchers and the user support teams in the process and environment. So for example, the SRS team at the Office for National Statistics have had extensive training on using the tool, and we're here to help you get that right and nail that as well. And if we could go to the next slide, please, as well, Tom. Thank you. So all the way along the application process, you can use the guidance that we've provided, as well as the user support provided by the ONS to finalise your application. Once yourselves and the ONS are happy with the application, it gets passed over to us at the UK Statistics Authority, and we take that to the Research Accreditation Panel for consideration. Just to give you an idea of the types of people that will be looking at your research project, so you can really tailor your answers to the form. The panel is chaired by Professor Paul Boyle, who's an eminent academic and currently Vice-Chancellor of Swansea University. We've got a range of independent members that have expertise in multiple disciplines, from health to social sciences, geography, actuarial science. We have chief data officers from a number of government departments and the chief statisticians from the devolved administrations as well. So together, all of these individuals will look at your project applications and discuss whether there is enough evidence there in each application for each accreditation criteria to be met and clearly demonstrated throughout the application. We work on a lot of projects from a number of different data owners and enable access to a number of different data sources, not particularly just MoJ data or ONS data. And you can see some of the projects that we've accredited here on the slide. But we've been running for around a year now, and we have accredited around 110 projects already. So far, the RAP hasn't outright rejected any of the projects that it has considered, and that is really down to the extensive user support that's given to you by your process and environment, but also the guidance that we've published on what's expected and what you need to get that project accredited. It is possible that the panel may request additional clarifications on some of the information you've provided, or possible revisions on a project, but if that is the case, that's nothing to worry about. Expert advice and guidance is given to you at each step of the way, and the ONS Secure Research Service team will be there to facilitate a dialogue between the panel and the researcher to ensure that any necessary amendments can be implemented effectively. So the panel has operationalised a flexible governance framework, and where possible, we really look to increase the pace of project accreditations, and we continue to adapt to ensure that we're looking at things and trying to approve things efficiently, while also ensuring that we maintain this robust scrutiny that is set out in the legislation. So that's an overview of how we legally provide access to the data and that decision that's made, but I'm happy to take any questions that you may have at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lily. So in terms of how do you practically access the data, there are 3 ONS safe rooms in Titchfield, London and Newport. There's also 5 other safe rooms hosted by other organisations in Nisra, Scottish Government, Perinatal Institute, University of Leeds, Liverpool and West of England. Obviously, in today's environment, we don't know if they will be open. I'm hoping that they will be by March. But otherwise, your option is assured organisational connectivity. So these are safe settings set up in an academic or business premises after agreement with ourselves, and they have to comply with a number of security standards and receive annual certification. We've got 41 organisations signed up currently, and at least 180 who we are in discussion with and in the process of setting up. If you have a question about whether your institute is AOC certified, or if you want to be, please contact Research Support. And we can check if you already are, tell you who the person is that we're in contact with, or get the ball rolling if you guys haven't contacted us before. So just a quick note there, when you give your head of department statement, if AOC will be required, you need to be able to evidence that they are supportive of doing that, because there are a number of sort of physical and security standards that they will have to put in place for you to be able to connect through AOC. And obviously I'll answer questions on that afterwards.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Rose. Thanks very much. I'll just wrap up quickly then with an overview of the timetable, and I think we're nearly there. So closing date for the JES proposals and the RAP application is Tuesday the 20th of October, and then you'll get email feedback on the RAP form following the ONS's feasibility screening by the 3rd of November at the latest, but they'll get cracking on those as soon as they come in, and they'll just keep flowing out. So once you've got that feedback from ONS on your RAP form, you can amend your RAP form and use that final version to kind of paste into the MoJ SAD application. And we'd encourage you to try and do that within a week of your feedback from ONS. They need to be with MoJ at the latest by the 10th of November. And as we've encouraged throughout, definitely reuse content between these forms. That's absolutely fine. The funding decision meeting will be in the week of the 12th of January, a date to be finalised. And then for those successful applicants, then we'll begin offer letter negotiations immediately after the funding decision meeting. If there's any funding conditions, we can begin discussions around those. You'll be working with ONS to polish off your RAP form ready by February. So, which will then go to the RAP meeting on Tuesday, the 9th of March. So documentation needs to be ready well in advance of that meeting, but there will be an opportunity to finesse it with ONS, and they'll work hard to make sure that everything's in place. And again, the research accreditation training, that just needs to be in place by the time of the RAP meeting. And soon after the meeting, everything being well, your data will be available in the project space later on in March. Yeah. Funding decision meeting, well, that will have already happened, and yeah, and then what basically once we've got approval through RAP, then we can offer the offer letter will be processed, and we'll set up an induction meeting for all research fellows as soon as that process has played out, and we'll look for the start date latest to be the 15th of May. And the reason for that start date is because we've got a limited budget that goes till the 31st of March 2022, and specifically these 6 months worth of funding are kind of balanced, particularly within the first 2 quarters of next financial year. So it's important that we get projects started on time. And just to note then, unsuccessful applicants, like we say, can continue dialogue with ONS and MoJ. If you don't get funding from ADR UK, you can find funding from elsewhere, and you just carry on with your project and with those approvals from data owners and UKSA on legal access to the data. Okay, thanks, Tom. And yeah, absolutely here to help. So do use us as you go. We encourage you to ask whatever questions you need. All the details are there. They're also in the call documentation. Yeah, and that's all of our slides. I might also paste actually in the chat box. There is a link to our mailing list. So if you want to, if you're not already registered on our mailing list, then you can get updates to all the latest news and future funding opportunities as and when they come up. So we'll try and get that pasted in the chat box, but it is also in all of the core documentation.